Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda at this time? Any additions to the agenda? Yeah, so I'm going to turn to the clerk, and Lisa, if you want to just highlight what we discussed earlier.
Sure. Through you, Chair. My apologies. In the agenda, it noted that SPA 05 was the confidential appendix. It actually should have read SPA 04, and it's just on for supplemental information.
So if board members want to make that noted change, we'll record that in the minutes as well. Any change in order of the agenda? Seeing none, so seeing no additions and no changes, can I get a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda? Moved by member Kasperset, second by member Beatty. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. The agenda is approved. Any declarations of conflict of interest? Declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, we have no presentations or delegations on the agenda this morning, which moves us right to administrative business, which is the approval of draft minutes. So board members have been given a copy of those draft minutes. Are there any questions or concerns with the March 26th Source Protection Authority minutes? Any changes or omissions? Seeing none, I'll need a mover to adopt those minutes. Moved by member Timms, seconded by member McPherson. All those in favor? Opposed? And those minutes are adopted. Thank you. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, there are no issues of correspondence, which brings us to business for information. There are no items at this time on the agenda. We will go right to business for consideration. The first report that we'll be putting on the floor is the Source Protection Committee SPC appointment, report number SPA 0418. At this time, I'm going to invite Jamie Campbell to come forward if he's available to provide clarification to the board. Welcome, Jamie. And Jamie, as we start every meeting, if you want to introduce the members of the Source Protection Committee that are with us this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. The Chair of the Source Protection Committee, Maria Bellantino-Perco, is here with us. She's appointed by the province and has been doing a great job there. With regards to this report, the individual recommended for reappointment has been the most valued member of the Source Protection Committee. I've worked with them for a number of years and have the utmost respect for their thoughtful contributions to the Source Protection Plan. It was with great relief they agreed to stand for reappointment at this important stage of updating the Source Protection Plan.
Thanks, Jamie, for that brief overview. Are there any questions or comments with respect to that report? Seeing none, I'm going to put that report on the floor right now. That report number SPA 0418, respecting the Source Protection Committee SPC appointment, be received. Can I get a mover to put that on the floor, please? Moved by member Shurton, second by member DeFrucio. Question or comments? Seeing none, the motion is to receive it and that the individual identified in Confidential Appendix 1 to report SPA 0118 be appointed as a Source Protection Committee member representing the public at large, and that the Source Protection Committee member identified in Confidential Appendix 1 to report SPA be publicly noted on the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority website. Question or comments to the entirety of the report? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Jamie. The next issue on the agenda is issuance of notices to Niagara Region. The following motion, I will put that on the floor. That report number SPA 0518, respecting issuance of notices to the Niagara Region, be received, and that the Director of Watershed Management be delegated authority to issue notices to Niagara Region for the purposes of Ontario Regulation 287-07 on behalf of the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, NPCA. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by member Tim, second by member Quirk. That report is on the floor for question or comments. Member Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just through you to Jamie, if you could give us an update on if this is a change, an improvement, or something that has been done in the past.
Through you, Chair. This is a new regulation this year. This is the province exploring how to do source protection 2.0, if you will, how to do it on an ongoing basis. It's an okay process. It hasn't really been tested yet, but I can say with a great deal of confidence, I believe it should work fine in Niagara Region. We don't have the same sort of development in terms of new municipal water treatment plants as in some of the other areas of the province. So I have every confidence that next year, Niagara Region will be bringing 3 of these notices to the Source Protection Authority next year. For the Niagara Falls new intake, because of OPG changing the flow in the Welland River. For the Welland water treatment plant intake, that'll be moving a couple hundred meters north. And then also for the DeQ Falls plant, where there's an EA undergoing some work to hopefully encapsulate most of the open channel into a pipe. So both 3 of those notices should be coming next year. And we've been involved with Niagara Region throughout, advising them, and their terms of reference for their consultants and EAs have had these components in there, as the environmental assessment process has also been amended. So it's a new process, but I think it's going in a thoughtful fashion and should work well.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So it's a new requirement of the province to provide additional protection to our source waters. And so it has to flow through the Source Water Protection Agency of the authority. And I appreciate identifying the 3 major projects the region's going to be involved with in the next few years in order to do that. The second question I have is about, does this apply as well to the smaller private water systems? Specifically, there's one in Wainfleet, I think, going to be coming up fairly soon. Would this apply to that as well?
Through you, Chair. There have been a number of discussions about that. At this point in time, nothing but the municipal systems would apply. However, if council or councils want communal systems or other systems to go through this process, that can happen. There is a procedure for that. It has only been adopted for about 2 to 3 systems in Ontario. Some would say that would be a very, very wise thing to do. Some would not. For example, the system you're referring to in Wainfleet, if the Township of Wainfleet Council wanted to have that system to be routed through the Source Protection Program, they could pass a motion. May have to go through Niagara Region, I'll have to check. However, then that system would also have the burden of care to have to complete all those studies, and then would have the burden of care that they would have to conform to all of those policies. So whenever a non-municipal system is adopted by council to go through the source protection process, they also then have to, well, someone has to pay for the studies, and then they have to conform to all the criteria that come out of that and the conditions. So it's an opportunity, but it may have some constraints at the end of it. I hope that answers your question, but I'm glad to answer more if you like.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, it does kind of raise more questions. The least concern would be the big municipal projects. The greater concern would be the smaller private projects, and the provincial regulation doesn't require but does allow those private systems to be routed through this process. And there's a whole raft of regulations the private system has to follow now to be safe. What is the difference? Is it just more studies, or is there really extra protection to the consumer on the other end of the line of this private system? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. My first thought is the difference is the Clean Water Act. So you're correct, best of my understanding. Non-municipal systems are either looked after by the MECP, the Ministry of the Environment and Conservation and Parks, or the local health unit for testing, for trainer operator certification. So I have every confidence that these non-municipal systems are delivering safe, clean water for that which they are tested for. However, they don't get the benefit of source water protection, which is to identify issues, be them quality or quantity, so that there's less trouble for the treatment plant. So again, it's an opportunity for these non-municipal systems. They can be adopted through the Clean Water Act, but that doesn't apply to them at this time. So yes, so your non-municipal systems have proper treatment, proper licensing, proper testing. They have oversight, but they don't have that extra burden of care of the Clean Water Act. But that is an opportunity, and there may even be an opportunity if a council wanted to have its own process separate from that, where you could ask an approval to conform to something, an official plan or something and so forth. But my recommendation would be, if there is a system like that, that at a regional council level or local council level want to adopt, we could show you the paperwork that'd be involved, and you could test that out and see what you think that would be, if it's a good idea or not. And certainly there are many other source protection authorities and committees in the province who have been advocating the province to consider pulling in non-municipal systems. But again, it's not without cost and work.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm pleased to support this step, and I assume that it will provide an extra layer of protection to the municipal projects. I'll be interested in following up on what is the process for the smaller communal. You remember that the region did look at extending water service all the way down Lakeshore Road in Wainfleet, and the cost involved with that. So I'd be interested in the follow-up from Jamie on what other municipalities are doing on the smaller the smaller private water services. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Timms. So I just want, any other question or comments from the board? I just want to follow up on the second point, that the Director of Watershed Management be delegated authority to issue notices to Niagara Region for the purpose of Ontario regulation. Probably it's appropriate at this time to introduce our new Director of Watershed Management. And Tarek, not to put you on the spot, but it just seems very appropriate that this motion speaks to your delegated authority. So perhaps at this time I'll have Mark introduce you. And again, if the board has any questions or comments with respect to this motion, Dr. Elzabad is here to answer those questions. So Tarek, welcome, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Brickell to introduce you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are indeed very, very pleased to announce the appointment of Dr. Tarek Elzabad as our Director of Watershed Management. Dr. Zabet joins the NPCA from the Provincial Government of Ontario, where he was the Assistant Deputy Minister for Environmental Sciences and Standards Division within the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. His professional career extends over 30 years in areas of executive management, strategic planning, regulation, water resources management, environmental protection, compliance, and enforcement. Not only has he worked with the Ministry of, within the provincial government in Ontario, he's done so in Saskatchewan and Alberta as well. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Earth Sciences and Industrial Business Administration, a Master of Science in Hydrogeology, and a PhD in Water Resources Management. We couldn't be more pleased or proud of our opportunity to bring Tarek to our organization. His experience, his knowledge, his technical leadership is going to be greatly valued here at the NPCA, and he will in fact be charged with leading the development of our long-term water resource management plan, which will be comprehensive. So I'm very pleased and honored to introduce to you Tarek Elzabad.
Welcome.
And on a further note, though, Mr. Chair, I must continue on with with some news that comes as mixed from an emotional point of view. From a professional point of view, we're very pleased and excited that Jamie Campbell has actually accepted a new position in the consulting world. And Jamie has been the outstanding leader of all things source water protection. He's been a hugely valued member of our team for many years. He is a great intellectual. He is passionate about what he does, and he's brought extraordinary dedication and commitment to this, to the job here. So I'm kind of sad to announce that.
So you know what, Jamie, I'm going to, if you want to have a few words, but on behalf of the board, thank you. Thank you for your dedication and your service, not only to the endeavor of source water protection, but to conservation and to the commitment of all the residents within the watershed. So your hard work is very, very much appreciated. Having said that, I'll turn the floor over to you if you want to say a few words. If not, then yeah, it's up to you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I had notes for everything except for that. So thank you for your kind words. I've enjoyed myself. It's been a good 12 years, and we're working hard to make sure that this transition is as seamless as possible for the different programs I spoke to. So thank you very much. And I'm still going to be a resident in Niagara Lake, working locally primarily, so I'm looking forward to as much overlap as possible, and that the programs continue successfully. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and we wish you much continued success in your endeavors. Thank you. So thank you for that, and again, welcome Dr. Elzabat. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the great work that Greg Fertney did as the interim director of Watershed. So I don't know if Greg is here, but Greg, thank you for stepping up to the plate and helping us certainly through this transition period. You've done a wonderful, wonderful job. So thank you, Greg. Any other questions or comments with respect to the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of receiving the following motion? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you very, very much. Jamie, I think that's it. So thank you again as your last order of business in front of the board. Thank you. Item number 7 has been scratched. There is no business in camera. We will go to new business. I'll poll the board. Is there any items of new business that the board would like to bring forward at this time? Seeing none, leads us to adjournment. Can I get a mover, please? That the Source Protection Authority meeting be now adjourned. Moved by Member DeFrucio, second by Member McPherson. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you. So we'll have just a couple of minutes, and then we'll start the full authority board meeting. So thank you, board. I know, hey, they're dimming the lights. Well, we are a conservation authority, right? So, yeah. Look, they're having their own meeting in there. Obviously. It's okay. It's okay. So I'd like to call this full authority board meeting for Wednesday, September 19th to order at approximately 9:54. Again, I extend the welcome to members in the gallery and those watching through our live streaming. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. I'll ask the board, are there any additions to the agenda at this time? Any additions? Seeing none. Are there any changes in order? Board members have any changes in order? I do have one. As a courtesy, I would like to move 3.2 delegations, NPCA policy document, Len Arts, Welland River Floodplain Association. I would like to move him up to present just after Mr. Kennedy presents as well. At that time, he can stay at the podium and answer any questions that the board may have. So if that's friendly, we can do that as a courtesy. I appreciate that. Seeing no other changes to the agenda other than the friendly one as a courtesy, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the following resolution, that the agenda be approved as presented. Moved by Member Shurton, second by Member McPherson. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Any declarations of conflict of interest? Any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, moves us on to presentations. At this time, I would like to ask Mr. Paddy Kennedy from Dillon Consulting to come forward. And the presentation is going to be on the NPCA policy document. After his presentation, Mr. Kennedy will avail himself to questions or concerns from the board. Welcome, Paddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, which I'm hoping is maybe the last time you'll see me for a little while. It's certainly been a long road working on this project, and it really is a pleasure to be here towards, I think, the end of this assignment. I have a summary presentation. The purpose is because the project has taken several years and there may be folks watching at home, I just wanted to cover a little bit of the history of the work and some of the background on the policy document update and just sort of give a summary of that process. You may recall that the existing policy document the NPCA staff uses is sort of their day-to-day tool to make decisions on work permit applications and to comment on Planning Act proposals in the watershed. Since late 2015, we have been working with staff to comprehensively update this policy document. It was last updated in 2011, so a fair amount of work was involved in updating the document. The need to update this document came out of the 2014 strategic plan. It was noted that there's been a number of legislative changes in the province, even locally through the local official plans. There's been a number of changes in the policy environment and necessitated the need to update it. And certainly from a user perspective, one of the things that we noticed is that there is an opportunity to provide a lot more clarity in the document to make it more easier to read, more user-friendly, and perhaps less of a technical tool, but also as a bit of an educational tool. So the overarching intention here when we began this, and this was something that the board directed to me right at the get-go, was that any changes we make to this document have to keep us in line with our mandate, make it very clear that the policy decisions and decisions on applications and permits can be tied to our mandate. And so there is a heavier focus on this update into the connection between policies and on the Ontario Regulation 155.06. And it does reflect those those obligations under the Planning Act. And to the extent we were able to, it does reconcile some of the confusion and overlap between these two pieces of important legislation that form the NPCA's mandate. The process was a three-phase process. The early part of it was simply on a project launch and getting our website up and running and laying out our consultation program. Phase 2, which took the better part of a year and a bit, was on an issues paper, discussion paper that we published and presented here and did engagement on that kind of scoped some of the main policy issues that the document needed to tackle. And the hardest work was the last bit. We did multiple drafts of the document, working it through, presenting it here to the board, working it through stakeholders and members of the public and others as we tried to finalize the document. Through that process, we did have a pretty comprehensive engagement exercise. The Act doesn't provide any specific guidance on how we're to go about consulting and engaging on a topic of this matter. To the board's credit, to staff's credit, we did have a very, what I think is robust exercise that included me being here 5 times to take your questions and make sure we're on the right track. We had consultation with a core working group made up of municipal staff members. We had interactions with the Community Liaison Advisory Committee. We had 5 public events on the draft document. We were out in the public to get comments on those. We also had targeted meetings with stakeholders that I'll talk a little bit in a second, and staff engaged First Nations as well in the exercise. As a result of the engagement, that draft document that was released back in April of last year, of 2017, we had formal written submissions from a number of the folks on a number of the agencies here on the slide, and worked with them through revising and making changes. So when I was here in in March, I shared with you sort of a summary of the nature of those comments and where we were going to go with some of those changes. We met also twice in April and June with the Welland River Floodplain Committee, because they had some very specific comments and issues they wanted to address in our floodplain policies. As a result of that sort of civilized, thoughtful dialogue we had with the group, we were able to make the changes that they were requesting out of our last meeting. I think we've landed on a fairly reasonable set of updated floodplain policies for this document. What's happened since that June meeting, we did get one final submission from a member of the public that had a number of comments on the original draft document. Given the timing and nature of these comments, the extent possible, we tried to accommodate a number of the comments. There are some areas where we would agree to disagree, but the changes we were able to make are sort of generally described up on the slide, which were some additional commentary on the agricultural focus of the policies, some additional references to our PPS wetland definition, and providing a little more clarity on our ponds policy. Taking a step back, the whole spirit of the update was guided by feedback, as I said, from stakeholders and discussions. We also have a number of provincial technical guides that we relied on to streamline and harmonize the policies. We did a best practices review. As I noted, we did have a discussion paper that scoped the exercise, and we did focus heavily on interpreting the Act. So what were the main changes? How is the document changed? How is it different from the one you have today? There is a focus on clarity. We use some very specific language in this new document that tied to the Act. So we use the term 5 tests in a lot of places. Those are the 5 tests in the regulation that give the authority the permission to regulate development, and if it's in the opinion of the control of flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, or pollution or conservation of land. So that's one of the main tests you see appearing in the document. From a Planning Act perspective, the document has been aligned with the new, it's not new anymore, but with the 2014 PPS, and certainly makes reference to the updated provincial plans, the Greenbelt Plan, Growth Plan, and Niagara Escarpment Plan. So there's alignment with provincial policy there as well. The way the document is organized is completely different. It focuses on each of the key features that the authority has either obligations to comment under a Planning Act application or obligations to regulate under the CA Act. We did introduce a bit of a spectrum tool to figure out how the definition of development is quite wide-ranging, and so that can lead to some confusion or understanding about perhaps. Certainly a comment we heard from the public is the authority maybe being too heavy-handed on certain forms of development. So we've introduced this spectrum, to help us make decisions on applications where we give more flexibility where a development exists and they're proposing to do something that has minimal risks. Maybe it's a non-habitable structure of some kind, versus a more stringent set of tests where it's permanent development and maybe it's new development and it's going to involve people living in houses and that sort of thing. The document includes a number of graphics and visual improvements that I hope enhance the clarity. It's got an implementation section that provides new definitions. It includes refinements to the need for studies and certain policies in that end. It includes direction as well for the CA to consider a variance process to help you work through some of the more complicated applications at a later date. So that's just kind of high-level overview of what the spirit of the changes are. The final proposed version has been comprehensively updated. It does, in my opinion, represent a significant improvement over the current existing policy document. With that in mind, though, no policy is perfect, and it needs to be tested and polled. So the idea is going forward, the document is a living document, and that you can do annual updates to improve particular policies or particular areas, or if legislation change. So introducing this notion that as a living document will be an important contribution, I think, to improving policy on an ongoing basis here in the watershed. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. And yeah, you've become quite the fixture over the last year and a half. So we appreciate the amount of time that you've spent engaging the stakeholders and answering questions and bringing forward those recommendations. So at this time, I'm going to open it up to questions or comments from the board. So Patty, if you just want to stay there. Any questions or comments from board members? Member Beattie.
It's a comment, really. I have no problem with the body. I've been on this committee. What was it, Bruce? Wellandport, 2012, 2013. Yeah. It's been a journey, and it's been a learning process. I only had one comment, and I made it to Patty earlier, and he showed me that I was wrong. I was wrong. You see that?
Yeah.
I was wrong.
We've captured that.
And that was, did they get that on TV? I raised a concern about page 7, page 17, and page 46. They are maps, and I really get my burr when I see Hamilton chopped off. It annoys me. But Patty showed me the document, and we didn't get chopped off. It was a matter of photocopying. So I was coming here to raise, and I find myself wrong. Thank you, Patty.
Thank you for admitting that. Question or comments, Member Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Patty. It's been a long journey, and I think well worth it. One of the concepts, the fundamental concept when it comes to the Welland River floodplain, I think was and perhaps you could tell me remind us how new this two-zone concept is. And I think you have a good slide up there defining the flood waiver and the flood fringe that we hope will provide some level of reassurance to those affected by the floodplains that there is an option in there that can soften what was kind of a single-minded one definition of a floodplain. So if you could give us a little time on the concept of the two-zone, I think it's on page 29 is where it starts.
Sure. Councillor Timms, through you, Mr. Chair. The old or the current existing enforced policy document has floodplain policies. They apply to one area, and they prohibit a whole wide range of development in the floodplain. The province allows for some different approaches to managing impacts in floodplain areas. They also have something that's called a two-zone approach, whereby the floodway, which is where the sort of the higher volume of flood flows go at a higher rate and higher speed that's more dangerous, has those prohibitions to development, certainly permanent development and habitable development. And the flood fringe, where the flows may not be as fast, but they may be wide, ranging in terms of geography. And so this is the flood fringe area, can have more flexibility for some forms of development. And so the changes the current document doesn't allow for this two-zone approach at all. So the addition we have made in this new is that the authority may consider applying a two-zone approach, and it lays out sort of the process for the authority to consider that and how they can apply it. So that's it was a big ask from the floodplain committee, and I believe a significant improvement.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one further comment. It appears, by the way, this is the way I read this anyway, that it is up to a municipality or a ownership group to request two-zone application of policy. I was in St. Catharines. We had that Labor Day storm, and we had a significant event on Walker's Creek, which is one of the creeks we have just begun doing floodplain mapping for. And it's a bit different, I think, from the Welland River floodplain, but the option for a two-zone in that case or in the Welland case would have to be a request from the municipalities. So in Walker's Creek, it's simple. One city, St. Catharines, makes the request. In Welland River, there's, what, 3 or 4 municipalities, and they would all have to make the request, or one just for the area within their jurisdiction. How would that kind of request come forward?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a sort of case by case. So typically, municipalities make the case for a two-zone approach. It can be municipal. It can be area-wide in terms of the whole municipality. It can be a couple of municipalities getting together, making their case together. The point is that you make the case that on the grounds that there's a bunch of criteria laid out in here, but you're sort of justifying that there's a need because there's perhaps municipalities foregoing economic benefits and losing development opportunity. When I say development opportunity, I mean sort of more intensification, that sort of larger forms of development that wouldn't be permitted in the plan. So unless you flood-proof them and you sort of raised the ground and made it appropriate. Minor forms of development aren't intended to be prohibited by this. So if you were looking to build sheds or barns and this sort of thing, they sort of, permitted, and there's a process for them. So to summarize that, yes, municipalities make the application and they make the case to the board and you make the decision.
Thank you. So I can see there would be the, West Lincoln, Wainfleet, Pelham would be the areas where this two-zone might apply because the very shallow floodplain can spread over acres of farmers' fields, and we're not sure yet exactly how the insurance companies would deal with the remortgaging or the mortgage companies or the insurance in terms of how this second zone would apply or affect their interpretation of risk. So I think it's important that it's the flood fringe area is identified for those reasons. You get into Welland and Niagara Falls, it might be more about the development, but in those other 3 at the upper areas, it's going to be more about dealing with the effects on the landowner, likely a farmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Timms. Any other questions or comments from board members? Thanks, Patty. I do have a couple of questions, and they're very pointed, and for the sake of brevity, if you just want to answer as succinctly as you can. In your opinion, then, the obligation to fulfill the scope and mandate that you started with, do you believe that you've accomplished that?
Yes.
Thank you. With respect to stakeholder engagement, do you believe that the stakeholder engagement process has been robust, it's been inclusive, and it's been as far-reaching as possible?
Yes.
Thank you. With respect to lessons learned, and as other areas are targeted for floodplain mapping, are there lessons to learn from this process that we can apply to future exercises?
I think certainly the lesson learned for me is about patience. As a consultant, we get a contract, a budget, and a timeline, and the pressure's on the minute we get it to deliver the work. At multiple points throughout this process, the board paused and asked for more time to either go back and do more engagement because we weren't satisfied that we had enough, or to take more time to have more conversations with the people who cared about the policies. So that was wise to take that time because I think it gets us to a point that got us the most buy-in. on topics that were pretty complicated. I think that using the multiple existing networks of connections that the NPCA has, having its CLAC, we formed a core working group, which is a subset of those municipal planners. Those were key pieces as well that allowed us to give us the confidence to put things in front of you that we felt was supported by your municipal partners.
Okay, well, I appreciate those comments. With respect to your comments on harmonization, so do you believe that this document fully reaches that level of alignment, harmonization, I use the word fidelity, with other policy documents, whether it's NEC, whether it's local area municipal planning documents? Do you believe that this document reaches that level of harmonization?
Yeah, certainly within reason it does. The easy thing to do in writing policy is to make it as long and lengthy as possible so you cover all your bases. So this document has to speak to multiple provincial plans. The easiest thing to do would be to copy and paste policies from the NEC plan, to grab stuff from the Greenbelt, like to fit it all in, and then you end up with something that's unwieldy and very, very cumbersome to work with. So we have done a fairly good job, I think, at aligning those policies and pointing people to other directions where there's an appropriate reference. So I think we've managed the burden professionally and fairly.
Okay, so with respect to those comments, is there a default mechanism then? Because if you have a policy document that simply says, see policy document, for example, NEC, see policy document, provincial planning document here, I'm hoping that it's not circular, that at some point there's a default mechanism that people can rely upon, that in the absence of this, in the absence of this, and in the absence of this, this is the default policy.
Yeah. The default policy is the more restrictive policy applies.
Okay.
And that's stated. And if that in those cases puts the authority in an uncomfortable position, there are then processes on a case-by-case basis to make individual decisions, right?
Okay.
And that's either your amendment process or your variance process or what have you.
Okay, just a couple more questions, and I appreciate your time. Thanks, Patty. So I know there was lots of discussion around the table when it came to language. So in your opinion then, this policy document has been crafted to reflect permissive language or prohibitive language?
It's definitely a balance that we've struck here. It's more permissive where the risks to development are perceived to be minor. So that's what I was talking about, where we have these non-habitable structures that are a form of development, but the risks may be low, so there's more flexibility in those areas. And we apply a greater lens and a greater tests for those development where the risks are to human health and safety.
Okay. So there's a balance in there then?
There's a balanced approach. Correct.
Okay. The last question I have, and maybe the comment I want to make, you've already mentioned that this is a living document. It's not static. So as new realities emerge, we will be taking an evidence-based, means-tested approach where this document has the ability to be fluid, to encapsulate some of those new realities and those new evidence-based measurements. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Given Ontario's political climate, the policy environment never seems to be very static for very long. There's a constant range of updates and changes, and particularly for conservation authorities whose mandate is wide-ranging. You're dealing with in cities, farm systems, you're making decisions related to infrastructure. You're going to be affected by policy changes on a month-to-month basis probably. So getting in the habit of revisiting the policies and checking them, are they still up to date? Do they still make sense? Are they right? Like, that's a new attitude, I think, that the opportunity is there to take that challenge on.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your candor and your responses. Thanks, Patty. Any other questions or comments from the board? The only question I have, Lisa, is this presentation part of the policy document that will be on the floor, or is this no? So at this time, I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder to accept the presentation and make it part of the public minutes. Moved by Member Timms, seconded by Member Quirk. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thanks, Patty. Stick around. We'll be dealing with the policy document very shortly. At this time, with the indulgence of the board, I would like Len Arts from the Welland River Floodplain Association to come forward. And Len, I understand you have Bev is with you and some other gentlemen, so if you want to introduce them as well, and we'll entertain hearing from them as well. So thanks, Len. The floor is yours.
Okay. I'd like to thank the board for allowing us to put a presentation together, and we did ask that we could do it after Patty. So I'd like to thank Patty too, because he was very helpful in allowing us and giving us extra time to deal with some of the things on the policy. And then we're quite happy that it's a living policy too, that things can be changed. So I got some other, I'd like to introduce, actually I'm the chair of the Welland River Floodplain Association. We have Don Smith, he's the vice chair, and I've got Bev Leopard there, he's going to do the presenting. One thing I want to make clear is that we're here, and I want to thank you for allowing us to be on the committee, also the Floodplain Committee, and so we're here with the Welland River Floodplain Association. So to present. So I guess I'll just let Bev, I think most of you have the documents here, and then let Bev present to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm here today representing the Welland River Floodplain Association. Our group was formed in January 2012 to address community concerns regarding the expansion of the regulatory floodplain along the Welland River by this agency. Since that time, we have worked with our communities, this board, NPCA staff, politicians at all levels of government, and technical and engineering professionals in our attempts to successfully resolve this issue. In addition to our ongoing concerns regarding the completion of the Welland River Floodplain Mapping Project, we are also very concerned about regulatory policies. We felt that the previous policy document was arbitrarily and unnecessarily restrictive. 2 years ago, when NPCA initiated the project to update and revise this policy document, we wanted to participate in that process. We feel that the process, although lengthy, has been mostly positive. We have engaged members of our communities, attended all public information meetings, participated in the Watershed Floodplain Committee, and Patty Kennedy from Dillon has been very open to our many suggestions and recommendations. For those property owners who find themselves in a regulated area, our initial concerns, although many and varied, can largely be distilled into three main areas. We felt that there were unreasonable restrictions to building, to the placement of fill material, and for the requirement to provide a lengthy list of expensive and complex technical studies. With regards to building, we feel that those property owners who find themselves in the floodplain should be allowed to live and enjoy their properties like all others. The risk, which exists in only the rarest, most extreme conditions, if at all, is simply in being there in the first instance, not in the size of your house or in the number or type of accessory structures on your property. We feel that the easing of some of the restrictions, as reflected in Section 4.0, should meet the needs of most property owners most of the time. We are largely satisfied with the improvements in this area. With regards to the placement of fill material, we believe that restrictions are largely driven by the ideological desire to maintain floodwater storage capacity. We strongly believe that any placement of fill material in all but the largest projects is so small as to make a negligible and immeasurable impact on design storm flooding levels. In fact, additionally, we feel that cut and fill permit requirements do nothing to reduce flooding. In fact, we believe that the CA would be more productive by promoting the placement of fill for best practices, floodproofing, and mitigation measures. And we would like to see more efforts in this area. Nonetheless, the small increases in allowable fill placement is a step in the right direction. We urge staff to set your radar high enough to avoid engagement in small construction or landscaping projects by individual landowners. With regards to studies and engineering reports, we don't feel that there has been much progress in this area. If you look at clause 12.4, the CA reserves the right to demand at least 9 different types of studies, plus other supporting studies as required. Many of these studies are complex and expensive, requiring engineers or other professionals. When faced with these requirements, many applicants do not have the knowledge or the resources to proceed and simply throw up their hands in defeat. For example, in clause 10.2.3, in order to permit the placement of over 250 cubic meters of fill, approximately 10 truckloads, 5 or more studies could be required. Most troubling of all, clause 12.4.6 requires an individual property owner to complete a floodplain mapping study where one does not currently exist. Not only is this a complex, expensive undertaking, as many of us have come to understand over the past 7 years, but flooding or water flows do not respect an individual's property lines or other arbitrary boundaries. There is no standardized methodology for floodplain mapping. Multiple studies on behalf of individual property owners by different engineers, perhaps using different modeling techniques and data sets, will result in a patchwork map that serves no purpose. If this agency takes flood monitoring seriously, it must take an integrated and coordinated approach to floodplain mapping in order to maintain accuracy and consistency. Do not burden or depend on property owners to complete this work. We are concerned that CA staff can request any study at any time with no downside or financial commitment. We would like to see much more burden of proof on the CA that a study is required and more partnership with property owners to avoid complex, time-consuming, and expensive studies unless absolutely necessary. We urge staff to do as much preliminary work as is practical to ensure that technical studies are necessary before burdening property owners with these requirements. In summary, we recognize and appreciate the time and effort that has gone into the revision of this document by staff members, board members, Watershed Floodplain Committee members, and especially by Patty Kennedy from Dillon. Although, as indicated, we are not enthusiastic about certain clauses, in the interest of moving forward, we support the adoption of this draft. We do have a few suggestions and recommendations we would like to share, if possible. First one, number 1, clause 12.7.4 describes a process for a proposal for a minor variance process to be developed in the future, whereby an owner seeks relief from the letter of some policy in similar fashion as is common with municipalities. We think this proposal has merit, and we hope that this can be implemented as soon as possible. We would like to see a reasonable fee structure and hope that the arbitrators can include members of the public. Number two, if this policy review and revision process is in fact nearing completion, we would like to see attention returned to the Welland River floodplain mapping project. Our association has devoted almost 7 years to date to this project, and we already have one member who did not live to see the final outcome. Number three, we hope and expect that the CA will fulfill their promise and obligation to host another set of public information meetings to show the final floodplain lines and to explain the latest in regulatory policies. And number four, as this agency moves forward with other public-facing projects, including any future floodplain mapping projects, please don't make the same mistakes that initially plagued the Welland River project. Engage the public throughout, not because you may be criticized for not engaging, but because you value the input from those impacted in the community. Do it not because you have to, but because you want to. That concludes my comments. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thanks, Bev. Your involvement in the process is very much appreciated, and I know sitting around the table with a lot of your committee members, you brought a lot of value to this entire process. I'm going to ask a mover and a seconder to accept the presentation, moved by Member Jeffs, seconded by Member Beattie. All those in favor? And that's carried. So that'll become part of the permanent record. With respect to the recommendations that you've brought forward, I'm going to ask our CEO if there's budget implications to any of those initiatives. And if so, I'm going to have all those recommendations referred to Budget Committee as we move forward. So, Mr. CAO.
We too, as staff, I would want to acknowledge that all the staff that have been involved with this, the committee that have been involved with this, we concur that the draft policy document certainly needs to be approved because we need to have a guiding document to serve us. With respect to the recommendations, we do view this as an ongoing process, and that while we've reached this milestone, this important milestone, we do want to continue these discussions. Some of the things that are being discussed here, we already actually have draft proposals to go into the budget for the board's consideration, including a comprehensive risk-based assessment of the entire watershed, so we can start to determine where we have low, moderate, and high-risk areas, so that we have a better way and a better framework to even enter into those discussions. With respect to, we are certainly willing to explore any kind of variance or trying to figure out a model that properly serves the needs of the watershed. When it comes to, we concur that there are issues with the costing and the financials related to all floodplain mapping. We're not required to do it. That's not within our mandate that we actually do it. That's one of the reasons that we want to enter into a risk-based approach to figure out where our money is best spent, and to lobby with others for the province to get more directly involved with the funding. So we do acknowledge the seriousness of the challenges of the funding matters when we try to take on one-off situations. But be assured as well that we have entered into one-off conversations with a number of property owners, and we do actually spend a lot of time understanding a particular property, going out to the site, meeting with landowners to discuss their individual properties. I don't see anything here that's a major financial request or has major budget implications. I think it's more about the ongoing dialogue and communication that we need to keep working on these things. And that's the commitment of the authority, is that We will continue. We don't see this as the end of the process. We see it as something that's going to have to be reviewed annually at the very least, and where legislation will require it as legislative changes come forward. So we are certainly committed to continuing the dialogue and as we go forward, continuing to have discussions with all of the stakeholders involved, and we will review it for direct financial obligations that we'll bring to the Budget Committee.
Okay, I appreciate those comments, Mr. CAO. At this time, I'll open up to the board for question or comments for Len, for Bev, for any members of their association that came forward. I'll start at this end. Member Beatty.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you. And thank you. It was one heck of a process. Going back now, for me, it's 5-6 years. For you, it's a lot longer. But when you think of the engagement, the communications, really, this is a model of how you should engage your community on such it's a significant major and two-part, as you pointed out. There's the red line that we're all waiting to see, and there's the policy as it applies to it. And when I started out in this, and I would thank Mr. Robbins especially and his lovely wife for their hospitality and for approaching me and saying, you got to come down and see the Welland River reverse. And I thought, what? The Welland River that far up actually reverses? And I went down and I had coffee and cookies a few times, and sure enough, you're standing there and it's running the other way. And that's because of the OPG. And you go from there and you learn so much about hydraulics and everything else that goes along with that part of it. And this document, which I've been through a few times with, I think, about 3 watershed chairmen. I haven't been through it with you, but we're coming to the end, right? So thank you. And at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, the letter that the association has sent us, they crystallized the whole thing down into 3. If you think of all the work, all the discussion, all the debate that's gone into the Watershed Committee by the members, by the board, by the public meetings that we've had, they've given us a document that really shrinks it down and focuses. And I would ask at the appropriate time that this document be, well, you got to add a date to it, September the 19th, but this document should become an appendix to this policy, because it shows what can be done when people work together to build a better community. And I would ask, when we get to that point, I would move that this become an appendix. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Beatty. I'm not sure of the propriety of that, but absolutely I will entertain any suggestion that you bring forward, and I'll leave it up to the membership to decide. Okay. Well, absolutely. Thanks, Stu. Any other questions or comments? Member DeFrucio.
I don't see anything here about a buffer zone. And the reason I say that is, if I don't see anybody here that was around at that time, because I'm a Centurion. The corner of St. Paul Street, Geneva Street, and Ontario Street, and the old former bridge over the 12 Mile Creek. They put a causeway in the late 80s and early 90s. They built 2 houses on the landfill on 12 Mile Creek. And there was a big controversy over the Conservation Authority at that time was against them building the houses there on that bank. And a lot of it was fill. because they realigned everything and put some new roads in and the causeway going from Glen Ridge to St. Paul Street and Ontario Street. Anyway, them two houses became a hazard, and they had to move the people out of them homes, and finally the houses slid down into 12 Mile Creek, and they tried to blame the Conservation Authority about that time. And I can't recall who was responsible. Anyway, there was a big court case, and two families lost their homes. And that's why you can't emphasize too much about having a buffer zone around these waterways, because anything can happen. We found that out last summer at Port Lucie. They built right up on the beach homes, and then they all got flooded. And who got blamed? We got blamed. The city got blamed. The city should have been blamed, because they shouldn't have allowed them homes there unless they had a buffer zone. And that wouldn't have happened. And I don't see anything here.
So I'm gonna...
And mark my word, we're gonna have high water again.
So I'm gonna try to...
There's gonna be a lot of homes destroyed. So
Thanks.
we better be careful and put these buffer zones in. And I forget what year it was. I went on a biennial tour, and it was out of London, in that district. And we were in Lake Huron, around, I forget now where Chemical Valley is. And all that area there had a buffer zone. And you couldn't farm within a certain area of Lake Huron. You couldn't farm there because those were the big factory farms of hog farms, and the manure and residue from the manure was leaking into the St. Clair River. So there's what I'm talking about, and we better be very careful. We might not see it, but somebody on this board will be seeing it.
No, I appreciate those comments, Mickey. So more of a comment, Bev, with respect to the issue of buffer zones. I'm going to redirect that to either Patty or David, if David's here as well, to answer the member's question with respect to buffer zones and the policy that's before us.
I'm not finished yet.
We're just going to get that answer for you about buffer zones, Mickey. Just hold on. Give me 2 seconds. Let Patty answer about the buffer zones.
So not every place needs a buffer zone where feasible. Correct. But most waterways are feasible. Look at 12 Mile Creek is now up, and there's going to be flooding on 12 Mile Creek.
Exactly.
There's a good example right there.
Patty?
So yeah, we haven't used the term buffer, but the policies do have allowances that for prohibitions on development. So on the shoreline areas, on the Great Lakes, there's a 15-meter buffer setback. That's the starting point. The floodplain is something that's defined specifically for each waterway, and that's what the policies that we've been debating about is just what is the right amount of development that's appropriate within that plain.
So the policy does address the member's concern?
Yes.
Thank you, Patty. Mickey, you still have the floor. Do you have another question? Do you have another question? No. No? Okay, thanks. Okay. Member Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to address my comments to Bev Leopard and Mr. Arndt and Mr. Robbins and the whole Welland River Floodplain Association. Echo most of what Member Beattie has said about appreciation for your participation, your early and strong response to the preliminary floodplain mapping that really brought to the board's attention the need for the process that we've been going through over the last number of years. I think the intent was, and the commitment of the board was, that the policy would land at the same time as the floodplain mapping. or closely together. So we've brought policy landing first, mapping coming very soon. I appreciate especially your point number 3 in the letter about can we get back to finishing up the floodplain mapping. But as we said, it was, and as I think the association made it very clear, they wanted to know the policy as quickly as we could and as closely as possible to the landing of the final floodplain mapping. So I thank you very much for your participation over the number of years. Certainly set an example, as you mentioned, for floodplain mapping that's going to happen throughout the conservation area in the next few years. I just mentioned the one, the Walker's Creek and Richardson Creek in St. Catharines, where we saw, a very recent event that showed that maybe the 100-year plan, 100-year floodplain line in that area needs to be redone, and we have already begun that process. So I just wanted to comment and ask your any further comment about your concern about 12.4.6, requiring individual property owners to undertake floodplain mapping if there isn't one in place. So we hope that by completing the Welland River floodplain, then nobody's going to be asked to do an additional study because there is a floodplain mapping in place. Your comments on that, Bev, because I know we're going to land on a final floodplain mapping position very soon.
Sorry. In terms of the main stretch of the Welland River, I would agree in that once the mapping project is completed, that should resolve those issues, and no one should have to individually do a mapping project of their own. However, that doesn't include all the tributaries of the Welland River watershed. It doesn't include many other rivers and watersheds, sub-watersheds in the region that don't currently have a floodplain mapping. The floodplain mapping has not been completed on. So, yes, this is a good first step on this particular waterway, on this one particular project, but I would submit that this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the Conservation Authority's work throughout the entire area of jurisdiction. If you'll recall, there was a certain amount of debate in terms of the scope of the remapping project, and we were less than enthusiastic about leaving out the tributaries because that's the other shoe to drop. So,
thank you. And I think that really puts a fine point on the issue of the value to the property owners within the watershed of having the Conservation Authority spend the money to map the floodplains so that it reduces the potential for the individual having to do this job down the road. And I just reinforce that as we continue to pursue floodplain mapping over the years, area by area, it is good value to the taxpayer, good value from the levy that we put on taxpayers in order to, as the Conservation Authority, because it's a general protection that would protect every landowner in the watershed. So thank you for making that point clear, and appreciate again all the work of the Welland Floodplain Association. We hope to have another one of those little cruises on that open flat boat, party boat maybe, when we finally finish this process.
I didn't make that one.
Well, you make the next one. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments, and however, I'd like to make a point, if I could. I appreciate the comments that our association has been involved in the work that we've done and has helped to facilitate this process. Our involvement in the policy document has been, although extensive, has been relatively focused on the floodplain issues. This agency has a problem engaging the public on issues. I know you make an effort. I know you put it in the website. I know you know, have ads in the paper. I know you make an effort, but it is difficult to engage members of the public. And in our instance, we were pre-engaged, if you understand my point. However, my concern is that there could be, and probably are, people or groups who perhaps have specific interests in shorelines, or specific interests in wetlands, or specific interests in valley lands, that really weren't engaged in this particular process. You know, we feel that we, to a certain extent, dominated the process in terms of the floodplain conversation, because that's our main primary concern. But I wouldn't be too surprised that down the road you'll get some flack from a shoreline group or whoever that said, well, we would have liked to have been involved. And of course you opened it for involvement to anybody who chose to engage. But again, the ability to connect with members of the public in all areas is a problem.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chairman, I take your point, and we have certainly learned over the years, but we also have learned that you put a policy in place and then you get a great deal of response to it. And as we've suggested, this is a living document, and we look forward to responding to whatever reactions there may be to the policies, but we do know that we have to have something in place to provide some measure of certainty or some working basis for people that want to do things within the watershed. So as I said, as we learned with you, or with the floodplain, we put out a preliminary line, and that got the attention. So we put out a policy, we'll get attention, and as a living document, we will look at how we can respond to that. So I take your point, well made. And this, I think, board has expressed the intention to respond as more and better than we have in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Timms. Member Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I just want to address your comment. I know that you were very involved with the meetings that we had, but I think if you looked at some of the presentations that Dylan provided us, there was a very broad-based consultation that went into this. So even though they might not be at meetings specifically, we did hear from a lot of different people on a lot of different issues. But so I do hear what you say, but I know even when you do like municipal official plans, people don't think about them until that impacts them. And so they miss out on the meeting because they don't realize what's involved with it. So you made a comment earlier about the sections that sort of require landowners to do certain studies. I think it was 12.3.6 in the lines. The wording in the document is may require, right? And that is one of the things that we've tried to do, as opposed to shall require or shall do this, which gives a little bit more of some leeway with staff interpretation, as well as an opportunity for, if we do create this sort of committee of adjustment or minor variance type model, will allow us to sort of take that, if it's between a homeowner or landowner and staff, and they come to a disagreement on what the requirements are, at least there'll be a mechanism to sort of interpret that may, and that does give us a little bit more flexibility, which we haven't necessarily had in the past. So if that comes to fruition, I'm hoping that'll sort of address some of those concerns, because we see those sort of wording in a lot of things that go to like municipal committees of adjustments. You may require this, staff says you do require it, you go to a committee of adjustment, and they say, yeah, you know what, you've made the argument that maybe that isn't required. So hopefully that'll address it. I do want to say that when I first came on the board, the floodplain mapping for the Welland River, so I was on end of 2014, we kind of sort of restarted that process because there had been a lack of consultation. So I'm really happy that after all this process, the comments that's come back from your organization and your association after the more robust engagement on the floodplain mapping, to actually have you say you're relatively happy with the policies is I think a huge step forward. So I appreciate that. So and that is definitely no small part to Member Jeffs, who was very vocal about that on a go-forward basis, that we had to rethink that process and make sure that we were communicating, and also to past Chair Timms, who sort of made sure that we led the charge to revamp that whole process and engage. So without your involvement, it wouldn't have been possible, so thank you for that.
Yes, well, thank you. But just to comment on that, yes, we have endorsed the adoption of the document, and we're relatively happy with at least some of the main issues that we've dealt with. But you know, let's be realistic. You know, is this document perfect? No, it is not. Is there going to be people who feel that they are required to do something that they shouldn't be? You know, sure there is. But in our instance, you know, like Mick and Keith said, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. So we felt there was enough positive developments and enough positive revisions that it should meet the needs of most people most of the time.
Anytime you can quote the Rolling Stones, it's a good day, Bev. Thanks. Member Jeffs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to thank the committee as well. I got to know these fellows very well over the last 7 years, and we've worked together. I mean, they've done all the heavy lifting, but they've been great advisors, and I've learned a lot from them over the years. So I want to thank them for all their efforts as well. And I'm glad that Bev raised the 12.4.6 with regard to the floodplain for certain residents requiring floodplain mapping for the tributaries, because that is becoming an issue. At least I've seen it a couple times in Wainfleet. We're getting pushback from residents. So I've had at least 2 instances, probably more, where people are frustrated. I actually had an alderman raise it at the last council meeting a couple weeks ago. So, I mean, I don't really know at this point, you know, where we would go with that, but I think it's something to keep in mind moving forward. And I do agree. I know that it was mentioned to include that initially, but I think the sense is that people pay taxes and then tax money gets floated here to the Conservation Authority, and that they shouldn't have to be, you know, doing those studies. And Bev makes a great point about patchwork studies, you know, in the future. So I just wanted, once he said that triggered, you know, I remembered that we'd had some issues with that, and perhaps your staff have even heard from our staff about it, but it's been within the last couple weeks, couple months. And then I have to just get in this last comment when Mark mentioned that we're not mandated to do the floodplain mapping, and I always go back to that I mean, you know, I know it's for safety reasons, and I mean, I understand we've been working on this for 8 years, but then every once in a while somebody will say, but we're not mandated to do it. And then I think, why are we doing it? Why are we sitting here having this discussion? But so I don't want to center you out, Mark, but I just wanted to make that comment, because I hear that repeated, you know, whenever we have this discussion. So anyway, those were just the points that I wanted to make, and I want to again thank them for all their hard work.
Thank you for those comments, Member Jeffs. Any other question or comments for the presenter? Oh, Mickey, you have one more small comment. Go ahead.
Sir, I forgot my previous comment. I forgot to mention about the flooding.
Oh, it's on. It's on. It's on.
Is it on?
Yep.
Okay, I forgot to mention about the flooding. Look what's happening in Mayor Jeff's jurisdiction and John Maloney's jurisdiction with erosion on Lake Erie. That's why I'm saying about buffer zones. But they're losing a lot of property up there is being damaged by erosion, and nobody can deny it. It's been reported in the media quite a few times. So I just want to emphasize that buffer zones and the public farms and homes that are built too close to the high water will be protected. But right now, there's no protection along Lake Erie, and the erosion is really bad. I remember Rocky Point Provincial Park, where I used to duck hunt years ago. That's all that land is gone. It's in Lake Erie. So that's just one point I wanted to emphasize.
Okay. Thank you, Member DeFruscio. So seeing no other questions or comments, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for your input and certainly express the board's gratitude to the Welland River Floodplain Association and all your hard work on this. It's been a long journey, and we certainly appreciate your comments. And to your point, it's not a perfect document. No document ever is, but we appreciate the endorsement, and we look forward to making sure that our stakeholder engagement is as robust and as inclusive as possible. So thanks again, gentlemen. Thank you. Seeing no other delegations, I'm going to move the, I'm going to need a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor at this time, and it's NPCA Policy Document Report number 60-18. I'll read the full motion, that report number 6018 respecting the NPCA policy document be received, and number 2, that the NPCA policy document attached to report number 60-18 be approved as presented, and that the NPCA policy document be enacted commencing November 1st, 2018. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by Member Kaspersets, seconded by Member Timms. That report is on the floor for questions or comments. We've had a very robust discussion. I appreciate Patty's comments and certainly the Floodplain Association's comments as well. Questions or comments to that? Member Beattie.
I think it's the appropriate time to make a motion that the Welland River Floodplain Association's letter be attached to this report, to this policy document as Appendix D. I would so move.
We have an amendment to the motion on the floor. I'll check the propriety with the clerk. That's entirely appropriate. Can I get a seconder, please? Seconded by Member Timms. So that amendment is on the floor for questions or comments. I'll put it to the board for questions or comments. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you, Member Beattie. And that will be point number 4. So if we can add that. Now the entire motion as amended. Member Beattie? No? The entire motion as amended. I will call the question.
Mr. Chairman, just to the main motion, okay. I'd like to ask that the CAO take some consideration of how to communicate this policy with the participating municipalities. I think there needs to be considerable effort in making sure that both the participating municipalities and the 12 municipalities of Niagara be aware, because there's constantly or often sort of a misunderstanding between the city and the region and the Conservation Authority as to whose policy carries, and how these policies should be implemented and who should be commenting on what. So I just ask that the CAO put together a plan to communicate this policy with all the affected municipalities.
Okay, so under normal circumstances, I would accept that as staff direction, but I do believe that that's been the crux of this entire process, and that's public engagement. I would ask if there's any member of the board that would like to add a number 5 with respect to engaging the public and communicating this document to all our stakeholders. Member Timms, you raised the issue. If you'd like to move that.
I would.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll craft that language to add a number 5, seconded by Member Beattie. Okay. Any questions to that point, that amendment? No? I'm taking that as number 5. Got it? Okay, so right now we have 2 amendments moved by Member Beattie, duly seconded with respect to the addition as appendix the comments of the Welland River Floodplain Association, and we do have a second amendment, which is number 5, which we will add, which engages the public to communicate these results in a more fulsome way. Member Jeffs.
Mr. Chair, so we're back on the main motion?
Yes, so
Okay.
the motion as amended with the additions of 4 and 5 are on the floor. I'll ask the board if there are any questions or comments to the amended motion. Member Jeffs.
So I just had a quick question. When will the final line for the Welland River floodplain be presented? Because that's a question that I get asked a lot.
Yep.
So do we know?
I'll put that to staff, if staff can comment on that.
I think Greg would be the most likely to be able to comment on that. Greg? Well, Tarek has it, okay.
Okay, so basically we met actually with the consulting company. We spoke to them. Actually, we're meeting next week, and we are at the final draft of that one. So we will look at some contractual issues, but we are almost there. So I think by probably January, we should have a document that will be presented to the board.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Member Jeffs? Okay, good. Any other question or comments to the amended motion? Member Beatty.
Just to follow up to that, and I take it we're discussing the line now as the other half.
Correct.
You said it's coming to the board. If it's coming, I thought the process we agreed to that it would go back to the floodplain committee before it came to the board. So
That's the intention, yes.
That's the intention, to take it to the committee and then to the board?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Tarek. Member Jeffs, yep.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So it'll go to the floodplain committee before it comes to the board. Will there be any further public consultation with regard to that?
With respect to the data sets and the actual lines?
Yeah, like will there be, let's say, like a public meeting before we actually approve it? So like in my mind, I'm thinking it would go to the floodplain committee, and then maybe there'd be one more public consultation, and then it would come to the board for final approval? Is that the plan, or?
So those are great questions. It's probably for a different kind of conversation. It's not really germane to the motion right now, but right after we approve this, if you want to bring that up under new business, and certainly we can get some information as far as what the process is moving forward, I'd entertain it at that time. Member Jeffs.
I appreciate your indulgence.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so the amendment motion is on the floor. Any other question or comments to the amended motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you, board members, and thank you for everyone that had a hand in the creation of this policy document, the results of which will be communicated to our stakeholders. I did. Yeah. No, that's good. Okay. The next item on the yeah. It's been a long process, and certainly we appreciate everyone's involvement and their cooperation, certainly their patience. The next item on the agenda is administrative business, the approval of draft minutes, 4.1.1 full authority meeting minutes. Are there any questions or concerns with the July 25th full authority minutes? Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, I will need a mover and a seconder for the following: that the full authority board minutes of the meeting held on June 20th, 2018 be approved as presented. Moved by Member Beatty, seconded by Member Kaspersets. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Item 4.1.2, the special full authority meeting open session minutes, September 7th, 2018. Are there any concerns or questions with respect to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll call for a mover and a seconder that the special full authority board minutes of the meeting held on September 7th, 2018 be approved as presented. Moved by Member Maloney, second by Member McPherson. Questions or comments to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And those minutes are carried. Thank you. Business arising from minutes. Are there any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, it takes us to correspondence on the agenda. There is a thank you note to the NPCA CAO, staff and board members from NPCA board member and Mayor of Niagara Falls, Jim Diodati. And again, this board expresses our our best wishes to Member Diodati in his recovery. Are there any questions respecting the correspondence? Seeing none, I'll need a mover and a seconder to receive those correspondence. Member Kaspersets, seconded by Member Maloney. All those in favor? Opposed? And that correspondence is accepted. Thank you. Chairman's remarks. So just quickly, I do want to make note that tomorrow evening is the John Turner Water and Environment Leadership Awards celebration. It's a fantastic event, and it's one of our signature events at the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Foundation. So again, thank you to the organizers. It's a wonderful event, and I look forward to the participation of the board and certainly all our stakeholders celebrating that award that we give out on an annual basis. I do want to make special note of another tree planting initiative that took place at Binbrook. So thank you to TD Canada Trust for their generous contribution. It's a national program that TD Trust does undertake. It's called National Tree Days. And we planted 300 trees at Binbrook. And again, it was in cooperation with Earth Day Hamilton. And again, partnerships continue to be fundamental, and it underpins everything that we do at the Conservation Authority. So again, all the partnerships that we've been able to produce and collaborate with are greatly appreciated, and this is a great example of those partnerships. So again, funding partners and people actually rolling up their sleeves and planting trees, it's just a wonderful initiative. And again, thank you for that. There was some comments with respect to the zip lining initiative at Binbrook and treetop trekking. I do understand that request was approved at Hamilton Council and at Planning Committee, correct? So that went to committee, and now it'll go to Hamilton full Council for their approval. And again, I'll rely on our members from Hamilton to bring forward any information with respect to that, but that's what I read in the newspaper. So it's a good first step. Again, anytime we can generate revenues on our properties while exposing our properties to the public, I think it's a great initiative. So thank you to our Hamilton members for their steadfast efforts when it comes to one of our signature properties, which is Binbrook. So thank you, gentlemen. That is it for my report, and at this time I will turn the floor over to our CAO to deliver the CAO report. Mr. Brickell.
Thank you, Chair. Just things are moving really well right now. We're on a good path. I want to remind you that the Thanksgiving Festival is fast approaching, October 5th to 8th. It's going to be fantastic. Adam and his team have been working like crazy to get it ready. It has been the tradition that board members have taken care of beer and wine sales, and really appreciate Member Maloney offering to do so. However, quickly finding out that he actually had his son's wedding to attend and therefore would not be able to keep that commitment. So I need other board members and senior directors to make themselves available. We typically need 3 to 5 people at all times to handle the volume of sales at the event. So again, beer and wine sales, that's Friday to the Monday. We need you basically from 11 o'clock till, I think it goes till 5 o'clock. So please sign up for that and let us know if you're available, because we do have to fill in behind Member Maloney, who wanted to do it all on his own. I did want to express my appreciation to Greg Furtney, who did cover in such a huge way, taking on the role of interim acting director of watershed. During his time, Greg took on a number of huge initiatives and did a lot of heavy lifting to move that side of the operations forward. Want to also note to the board that in all of that, as Greg now returns to the operations side, he's actually been promoted to senior manager of operations, and it's well deserved. Greg clearly shines in that role, and we look forward to having him back leading that portion of the organization. And, oh yeah. I don't know which is right, because last year I attended Mickey's 92nd birthday, and he's been telling me that his birthday is his 92nd birthday this year, but I believe it's actually his 93rd birthday, September 8th. Happy birthday, Mickey. Another great year, and we're so happy to have you here. And finally, I do want to express appreciation to the many staff who've been working, and the board members from Hamilton who've been working on the Binbrook treetop trekking project. This project's taken years to get to this point, gone through a number of studies. It's been a huge lift, but we look forward to delivering that treetop trekking adventure to Binbrook, and want to commend all the staff and board members who've worked on that. Very pleased to have the support of the Hamilton Planning Committee, and look forward to Hamilton Council's full support. I believe it's next week when it goes there. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Any question or comments for either my remarks or the CAO's? Seeing none, that leads us to item 5, business for information. 5.1, financial and reserve report month ending August 2018, report number 61-18. Can I get a mover and a seconder for the following resolution, please? That report number 6118 respecting financial and reserve report month ending August 2008 be received for information. Moved by Member Shurton, seconded by Member Quirk. That is on the floor for question or comments. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Oh, Member McPherson, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just this is with regard to the budget, consolidated budget, and just being new to the process here. Any concerns with the Ministry of Natural Resources transfer payments? I'm seeing that they're not in as yet. Don't know if that's to do with change of government or anything like that. Pretty significant number in the statements. So here we are at the end of September. So just wondering if there's anything through to Mr. Chair or the CAO on that item.
So thank you for bringing that forward. I'm going to delegate that question to our staff, either Mr. Brickell or one of our directors.
Thank you for that observation. There's nothing unusual. The ministry is just behind, and it may very well have to do with the new government coming in. Nothing's changed. Normally we receive that notice towards the end of August, but we should have that confirmation. We were inquiring about it this week and should have that confirmation fairly soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for the question, Member McPherson. Any other question or comments with respect to that report? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is received. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is business for consideration, standing committee reports. 6.11, 2019 Conservation Ontario Biennial Tour Planning Committee minutes of September 6, 2018. At this time, I would like to bring forward Erica and Renee to the podium. I'm going to let you guys present. At the same time, though, what I'd like to do is put this on the floor, let Erica and Renee present, and then if there's any question or comments afterwards to the report or to the presentation, I'll entertain them then. So at this time, the resolution of the board is as follows. Number one, that the minutes of the 2019 Conservation Ontario Biennial Tour Planning Committee of the meeting held on September 6, 2018 be received and the following recommendations approved. Number two, the presentation respecting the draft itinerary and draft budget for the 2019 Conservation Authorities Biennial Tour be received, and that the draft budget 2019 Conservation Authorities Biennial Tour be approved as presented, and that staff be directed to prepare a report for the Budget Steering Committee consideration that addresses the budget needs for the 2019 Conservation Authorities Biennial Tour. Can I get a mover and a seconder to put that on the floor, please? Moved by Member Kaspersets, seconded by Member Shurton. So that report is on the floor for your question or comments following the presentation. Erica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, NPCA board members, and thank you for this opportunity. Renee and I are very excited to share with you today for consideration the work that has been done so far through the 2019 Conservation Authorities Biennial Tour Planning Committee. The 2019 biennial tour mirrors our next strategic plan. And if I may quote just a short paragraph, our success is dependent in working in collaboration with our partners in conservation, and that is the theme of our biennial tour. We're going to start by showing you a really great video that our teams have been working on. The purpose of the video, it will accompany a save the date graphic card sent by Conservation Ontario to all the conservation authorities, and it will serve as the first outreach and our first promo piece to get everybody on board and anyone making sure that our biennial tour is on their calendars.
And of course, whenever you need computers, they don't work properly, even though you prepared. Thank you. You've already seen it. Yeah, yeah.
Planted our roots, we flourished, we thrived. To conserve our home, we must work together. This land holds all of us. It's our shared responsibility and a part of our commitment to focus on watershed resource management. Rebuild the tree canopy, forge corridors, and create parks while remaining sustainable. As we conserve the beauty that was handed to us and reconnect with the earth, we will explore new, important, diverse partnerships in order to hold on to what we love about our land. The Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority has one of the most complex watersheds in Ontario and is comprised of lands drained by the Niagara River, 20 Mile Creek, the Welland Canal, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. The NPCA manages 41 conservation areas found across the Niagara region, portions of Haldimand County, and parts of the city of Hamilton. Our watershed is within the Carolinian Life Zone, with ecologically significant features like the Winnipeg Rock and the Niagara Escarpment, which is part of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Niagara is also home to Canada's oldest sugar maple tree, the Comfort Maple. At the headwaters of the Welland River sits the Binbrook Reservoir, which was built when the NPCA was established in 1959. We are looking forward to hosting you as we celebrate 60 years in conservation and welcome you to come discover NPCA.
Thank you, Erica and Renee, and I see that you did some editing. I recall Member Beatty has some concerns with matching up some pictures to the commentary, so glad to see that was done. Thank you. You still have the floor, so if you'd like to elaborate on the presentation? Go ahead.
Yes, so we still have this portion of the presentation. So as you can see up there, we have confirmed the dates as Sunday, September 22nd to Wednesday, September 25th of 2019. These were ran by Conservation Ontario to ensure that there were no other conflicting events, and everyone that we wanted to be there could be there. We're going to walk you through the itinerary, which starts day 1 on the Sunday and continues on to day 4 on the Wednesday. Starting with Sunday, September 22nd, the hotel check-in is scheduled for 3 to 5 p.m. with dinner from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Hilton Garden Inn. For your information, we did do a lot of research in terms of the hotel that we were going to choose. We consulted with Hilton Garden Inn, we consulted with White Oaks and the other new hotels that are behind White Oaks and the Hilton Garden Inn, and the Hilton was our best choice. For further details, we are hoping to celebrate our 60th anniversary that evening with cake, and we're hoping to bring together a welcoming team for the biennial tour guests comprised of NPCA committee members, volunteers, and staff. For further information, we chose staying for the dinner at the Hilton Garden Inn because it allows for less travel time, considering that a lot of our guests will have traveled from all over Ontario, so we don't know how long their traveling has been. And it also lower our costs by having the dinner held at the same hotel where we will be staying. Some photos of the hotel. And we're on to day 2.
Thank you, Erica. So the itinerary for Monday, September 23rd, we believe that this is a balanced itinerary in terms of geographic locations, active versus passive parks, as well as projects and partners. We start our day having breakfast at the hotel at 7:45 a.m. There will be video presentations every single morning to give people a rundown of what the day is going to consist of. We need to leave by 9 a.m. to get to Cave Springs, which will be our first stop. We wanted the first stop to be something amazing and stunning, and I think we have that with Cave Springs, a site that is located on the Niagara Escarpment, and there is actually quite a bit to talk about at that site regarding partnership meetings as part of the master plan process that we did internally here, and we plan on highlighting the ecology, cultural, and natural heritage that's found at Cave Springs. Moving along to stop number 2 will be one of our flagship properties at Binbrook. There's lots to do there, and we've earmarked quite a bit of time to allow for guests to enjoy some of the different recreational opportunities that will be available. We'll also highlight partnerships, and there will be casual outdoor lunch. Moving along to our 3rd stop, we'll be at the Comfort Maple. It'll be a shorter stop, about 30 minutes, but we will be speaking about things such as the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Foundation's legacy project that is actually in the works. We don't have many details to talk about today. However, that is something that we hope to include, as well as our partnership with our local Turner Marv Enns, who has assisted the foundation with the Comfort Maple Pen fundraiser. And we'll also highlight our ongoing positive relationship with the Coyne family. Moving to stop 4, this is a park that is essentially closed to the public. However, there's lots to talk about and lots to show. We have a great story here regarding partnerships. There's also a beautiful mill to highlight, and we're hoping to have representatives from all of the academic institutions that we work with at this property to come and speak about how we all work together. Moving along to our next academic partner, the Wood End site will highlight the DSBN partnership and the work that they've done with the Walker Living Campus. And we also hope at some of these stops to bring out other partners that can speak, and we're hoping that Walker Environmental would be a good fit here. They can talk about some of the stuff that they are doing across the street at the quarry. Getting back to the hotel at 5 o'clock, we'll leave our guests about an hour to refresh and leave the hotel for 6 o'clock. We'll be arriving at Southbrook Vineyards, which was chosen. We had a few wineries here, and Southbrook ended up being the candidate that was chosen, obviously due to them being a leader in sustainable farming practices. And we also have a partnership project that we can speak to and highlight regarding nutrient management projects that we've done with them there.
before we continue, we also wanted to provide you with some additional details. As part of the itinerary, we have included the availability of a packed lunch, which will be provided to every single guest. In previous years, because there's certain stops where they're provided with a snack, where they're provided with a lunch, this allows them to be able to eat throughout the day and essentially not go hungry waiting for the next stop. Each day will also feature a mid-afternoon stop to highlight a partner from the wine and brewing industries, which we work very closely with. As you know, Bench is a great example of that, Branch Brewing, and we also have Calamus, as they're announcing this Sunday at the grand opening of their winery, the launch of the 2017 Balls Falls Red. Following that, we also have, during each travel time, we will include video footage, short presentations, Q&A sessions in the bus relating to previous or future stops, and there will be also downtime after long visits.
Okay, so Tuesday is packed. We start our morning off a little bit earlier because we wanted to bring everybody out here to Balls Falls to enjoy this beautiful property. We needed to allow for a little extra time to tour the historical village, also give them opportunity to see the falls, and there's so much here to discuss in terms of history, the Thanksgiving festival, all our different partners and volunteers and sponsors that work with us here, and of course highlighting the relationships with Bench Brewing and Calamus. Moving along to stop 2, the buses will actually split into 2 tours here. They'll have a choice of either experiencing the Wainfleet wetlands or the Wainfleet bog as some of our passive properties. Option 1 will be to be visiting the least disturbed bog in southern Ontario with highlights regarding the restoration from an extracted peat site to a more natural bog system. Option 2 will be a tour of the wetlands, Wainfleet wetlands, the quarry work. There's also something called the fossil walk there, and we're hoping to have time to stop at Lakewood Beach. We'll be highlighting restoration work here as well as site history and site resources. Both the tours will meet together for lunch at Morgan's Point. Here we will look into insight into park management, a presentation on Fowler's toad as an endangered species, and our guests will enjoy a beautiful farm-to-table lunch. After lunch, the stop at E.C. Brown is another passive property, and there has been major habitat restoration projects here led by restoration but facilitated by RAP, so we will have staff there to speak about those projects. Stop number 5 is a little interesting. It's a unique hydrological feature to Niagara. The old siphon location specifically is where we're going to show our guests how the Welland River is diverted underneath the old Welland Canal. And if time allows, we would like to also have a stop at the Power Canal. If not, we intend on showing a video that will show how the water is reversed in the river. And of course, there are multiple partners here to speak about with the management of this particular location. We're going to arrive back at the hotel a little bit earlier to allow guests to have some downtime. They will have exerted quite a bit of energy on this particular day. However, we do need to leave the hotel promptly at 5 o'clock because we want to take our guests through the back roads to the Niagara Parkway to see, I do believe it is the Sunday Most Beautiful Drive, and a stop along the parkway as well so that they can take a picture. Arriving at the Butterfly Conservatory for a tour hosted by the Niagara Parks Commission. We're hoping to have a water quality demonstration by Josh and our team. We understand that this might not be something that, well, some board members may have seen, but other board members and other guests may not have seen, and it tends to go over very well. After that stop, we will be finally ending up at the beautiful Queen Victoria restaurant to have dinner overlooking the falls. Hors d'oeuvres at 6:30, dinner starting at 7 o'clock. There will be a photo opportunity with the falls lit up in the NPCA and Conservation Ontario colors for about a 15-20 minute window. And we do plan on inviting our partners at the RAP program to speak about the Niagara River and the International Joint Commission work that was done. We also plan to highlight one of our significant partnerships with Carbon Farmer And we also plan on having 2 buses, 2 different times, buses that will leave right after the dinner and one that will leave a little bit later in order to allow guests to enjoy themselves in downtown Niagara Falls.
Some photos of the stops that Renee just described. And this takes us on to day 4. Day 4, it's Wednesday the 25th. We are having breakfast at 8 a.m. again at the Hilton Garden Inn. During breakfast, we'll be raffling away approximately 2 to 3 packages consisting of weekend getaways. We chose to do this because in previous years, in previous biennial tours, guests tend to end their tour on the Tuesday night, just because they do have a little bit of a travel to get through, but we're hoping to keep them for the Wednesday to allow for a networking period. At the end of the day, this is a very unique opportunity where we'll find board members, we'll find staff, we'll find all sorts of different stakeholders throughout all of the conservation authorities across Ontario in one room. So it's a unique opportunity that will provide us some networking time. We will also allow for a sneak peek into the 2021 Conservation Authorities Biennial Tour, depending on who's hosting it next. And again, allow for the networking period, hopefully ending in final thank you and departure by 10 a.m., could be moved up to 11 a.m. Moving along to the guest expenses. So through the planning committee, we had discussed an early bird ticket option at approximately $495, which will be available up until June of 2019. This allows us to sort of figure out where we're at with the numbers and what we can do to move them along. And then we also have the regular price ticket after that at $575. Hotel rooms for those dates are approximately $179 to $189 for our guests, depending on single or double occupancy. Then we have the NPCA expense breakdown. Every board member should also have a more detailed copy in your agenda packages, but this sort of give you a good overview of the money spent in food and beverages for the 4 days, in communication costs, which include the advertising, the communicating to our guests, the promotional, the videos, and all the printing, and other tour expenses such as transportation, decor, AV, swag bags, etc. This brings us to an estimated total of, which you can see up there, around $94,000, an estimated revenue of $93,000, which includes the ticket sales, as well as what we're hoping to accomplish in sponsorship and donations, leaving us at $1,744, which is essentially our miscellaneous and contingency plan, which we hope we won't have to use. That is all from us, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Erica. Thank you, Renee, for all your work on this. And just for some historical context, it was this board that gave me the mandate to request and wrestle away the 2019 biennial tour from one of our other Conservation Authority partners. So thank you for that. And a lot of this board had an opportunity to attend the 2017 biennial tour with our partners Credit Valley and Conservation Halton, and they did an okay job. But we plan on really exposing how beautiful Niagara is, and we're looking forward to welcoming our conservation partners here. So thank you for all that work. It's been a long process, and I'm glad to see we've reached a point where we can get the endorsement of the board, finalize some of those plans, and it was a busy 2017. And a lot of times, you know, we've heard a lot of things that are wrong with the Conservation Authority. This is one of the things that we hope to elaborate on and show a lot of people what is right with the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. We have some incredible properties and some incredible partnerships that we've been able to you know, maintain, and we're looking forward to that theme moving forward. So having said that, I'll open it up to questions or comments from the board of either Erica or Renee. Member Beattie.
You're sneaky. Excellent, but sneaky. I read the minutes, and I was getting ready for a really good rant today. Because when I read the minutes, my comments in committee were not there. I look at the document they gave us, which is the document that I ranted at in committee, and then you put this up on the board, and if I could, I'd hug you. But there's only one little thing that I would request.
I'm ready.
Okay. As in this and all the other pictures, the strategic plan, and I might add that the strategic plan has been overhauled, and I think it's looking a heck of a lot better. But on this one, just a little wording in white or whatever, telling the people where it is, what it is. I know the bridge, but nobody else knows the bridge. The Balls Falls picture, thank you. I'm figuring that was you, right?
I found it.
You found it.
Just for you.
And the pictures that we have up there, so when we approve this, we're not approving this document, we're approving that document, correct?
So this specific document that you're seeing here is only the presentation that is meant to be internal for the committee and for the board.
Yes.
The video itself does actually have each location that's highlighted at the bottom, does have it where it is.
Yes.
This presentation won't be used for that. Once we have the final itinerary with all the details, with everything that will be going on, it'll be a whole different document that will have everything you just asked for.
At committee, you gave us this document with the pictorial. I asked that the pictorial be changed. You've done a fabulous job of changing it. I compliment you. You're both sneaky. She's smiling and enjoying this.
Thank you.
But the only comment I have is that could we include, that's the document we're going to approve today?
You're approving, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, you're approving the itinerary, not necessarily
Okay, we're not
the
approving
document.
this report as its pictorial representation.
Correct, the
really
content.
sucks. Yes. We're approving the content. I don't have a problem with the content.
Yes, so
But,
in order to save some costs, we didn't want to send this out to the designer until it had full approval from the
Good.
board.
Good.
Generally, there is a far more detailed itinerary that goes out to the guests,
Yes.
and that is something that Carrie and I and Erica are currently working on because we need to break out the projects and the partnerships into a lot more detail. So that final document will come back to the board in the future.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mickey?
I think we missed a boat somewhere here. Every year, the city of Niagara Falls gives a hotel break. I think it's around Christmas time.
Yes, it's called the Sleep Cheap.
Yeah, I think it's half price. We could approach the Tourist Association in Niagara Falls and saying this tour happens every 4 years.
2 years.
We would like to have this tour be part, instead of being at Christmas time, have it here, and we can get the hotels for around $100 or less, like they do it every
Sure.
Christmas.
All great comment.
We might have got double of, what do you call it, tour people.
All great comments, Mickey, and I'm going to leave it up to Erica and Renee, the partnerships that they've been able to craft and the costing and the pricing that they've been able to do with respect to the hotels.
And the other comment was, Oh Canada A, instead of having a dinner at a winery, you have the dinner at Oh Canada, what do you call it, tourist thing, and
Dinner
then
theater,
you have a show with it.
The only problem with that is we want to highlight our properties,
I
and
was
certainly.
supposed to be on that committee, and nobody ever called me.
Well, the committees are open to any membership, Mickey. So, again, some great comments. Thank you. This has been a long process, and I appreciate the work that both Renee and Erica have done. So,
And the hotel's room, it's not too late. You can make a deal with Mr. Diodati.
you know what? I've seen Renee in action, and she's all about making the deal. So,
Well,
I have full confidence in Renee to make sure that those partnerships are crafted and created. So, thank you for your comments, Mickey. Any other question or comments? Member Quirk?
You
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to staff, the CAO, the whole team that's put together this program and this itinerary, and the committee did a great job, I think, in highlighting all the partnerships that we have. So I think it's going to be an excellent tour. I think we really have a lot to show. I actually, when we go through it all, I'm just disappointed all the stuff we don't get to go to, but there's such a full packed itinerary, so I appreciate all the work that's gone towards that. So thank you very much.
Any other members have questions or comments? Member McPherson, then I'll go to Member Beatty for a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to echo my comments, it looks like you're going to send off a very happy but tired group after 4 days of action. And you know, I couldn't be more happy as the local representative that you're going to take some time in with Calamus and with the new bench brewery. I think that will be a highlight for some of the attendees who haven't had that opportunity yet. So great work, and I only hope I can attend next year. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Member McPherson. Member Beatty for the second time? No? Okay. So the report is on the floor. I'm going to ask that the presentation be form part and parcel of the... okay, so it's in there. Good. Seeing no other questions or comments. Oh, Member Casper says you have something? No? Okay. It's been duly moved and seconded already. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Renee, Erica, thank you. And moving forward, just keep the board apprised of our success. The next item on the agenda is item 6.1.2, Budget Steering Committee Minutes of September 10th, 2018. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please, to put those Budget Steering Committee minutes on the floor? And I'll read the full resolution that the minutes of the Budget Steering Committee held on September 10th, 2018 be received, and the following recommendation be approved: that the draft NPCA Key Performance Indicator process and draft work plan be endorsed as presented. Moved by Member Quirk, seconded by Member Kaspersets. Questions or comments? Member Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, with respect to the strategic plan that we adopted, there was a requirement to implement some key performance indicators, and that process was referred to the Budget Committee because it will have budget implications. I was very happy with the process that has been outlined by our consultant, and I know that staff has a lot of heavy lifting to do to get us to the point where we can actually include those indicators within the organization. But one of the interesting things that I found from that presentation is that it's a twofold system. One is the staff and the internal key indicators that they'll be using to measure the information that they gather and bring forward to the board on a timely basis, as well as indicators that the board can use to determine whether we're on track with our strategic plan. So I'm looking forward to bringing those together as part of the overall budget process. So thank you.
And thank you, Member Quirk, for your involvement in that process. It's a work in progress, but your work on that file is greatly appreciated, so thank you. Seeing no other questions or comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda, 6.2, reports. Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority Administrative Bylaw, report number 62-18. I'll need a mover and a seconder for the following resolution: that report number 6218 respecting the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority Administrative Bylaw be received, and that the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority Policy Handbooks number 1 through number 4, noted below, be repealed and replaced with the draft Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority Administrative Bylaw attached to report 62-18 as Appendix 1, and all-inclusive Policy Handbook Regulation number 1, Governance and Administration Policies, Policy Handbook Regulation number 2, Meeting Procedures, Policy Handbook Regulation number 3, Hearing Procedures, and Policy Handbook Regulation 4, Code of Conduct. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by Member Kaspersets, second by Member McPherson. That resolution is on the floor for questions or comments. Member Beatty.
A comment that I got to watch what I say. The AGO report.
Yes.
It, I think, will have an impact as well on these. I think, not knowing what's in the final report, but should we hold this until that report comes in? Because I'm pretty sure that that report will have an impact on these. Or are we just going to do it now and then come back and do it again?
So all good questions. I'm going to ask, do you want to, well, I'm going to let Lisa speak to it first, and then I'll let you speak to it, Mark. That's fine.
Through you, Chair, to Board Member Beatty. The reason the report is to you today is to ensure that we meet the December 31st deadline. This, much like the NPCA policy document, is a living document. We can make amendments as we proceed.
Further comment to that, this is largely housekeeping. We are required to do this through the Bill 139 changes. This was agreed, the format was agreed upon by Conservation Ontario, and we agreed to participate through that process and the development of best management practices. It very much aligns with our current Regulation 1, 2, 3, and 4, with some changes that are identified for you. Want to commend, obviously, Lisa, Debbie Gullett, and Greg Fertney for the heavy lifting they did on this particular one to make sure that everything was caught in here and captured. But it's, for the most part, this is actually housekeeping.
Member Beatty, you still have the floor? Good. Any other question or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. 6.2.2, wedding fee update, report number 63-18. I'll need a mover and a seconder for the following resolution, that report number 6318, respecting the proposed 2020 wedding fee schedule, Balls Falls Conservation Area, be received, and that the proposed 2020 Balls Falls wedding structure for 2020 attached to report 6318 as Appendix 1 be approved. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by Member Kaspersets, seconded by Member Timms. That report is on the floor for question or comments. Member Shurton.
My only question, and I apologize, my agenda didn't show up, so I read it online early this morning. The wedding fees, I see they're going up, which is fine. Did we consult other venues that have them, or what was the rationale in the increase in price? I know we talked about it in the past about upping it. I just want to make sure that we're still in the market and not too low in the market also. So I don't know, maybe we're not high enough.
Okay, so I appreciate those comments. At this time, I know Adam is in attendance. Adam, if you want to come forward. Mark, if you want to. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for the question. I'll have Adam respond to some of the specifics in just a moment. We have been gradually increasing these rates over time. We do regular checks against other venues. But here, this is a really good news story here. When I came here in 2014, the most we were getting for a wedding was about $1,200. Now the rates have consistently gone up over time. The market clearly accepts these changes, but you can now actually spend as much as $12,000 to $15,000 for a wedding at Balls Falls. Previously, it was $1,200. That's the difference. These weddings are the barn weddings are sold out every single year, and now through the work of staff, Adam and his staff, this center is largely sold out as well. So we continue to move in the right direction. I'll let Adam speak to you about the specific process and other venues they compare with.
Adam?
Thanks, Mark, and through you, Chair. The only thing I want to add to Mark's request is that if you remember last year, we actually did a full study that was presented to the board that showed the averages and where we are, and we feel these prices go back to merit that.
Yeah, I do remember that, so I just wanted to make sure that was the approach we took. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Just stay there for a second, Adam, just in case there's other questions or comments. Member Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to, again, thank Adam and the team for all the work that they've done to make this one of the preferred destinations for weddings, actually, with respect to the work that we've done. But you go back to what the CAO said when the old rate was only about $1,200 and the Balls Falls Conservation Center was actually being subsidized by the taxpayer. We were finding that you're actually in essence, subsidizing other people's weddings through the process, if you look at it that way. Now that we are, the Balls Falls Center for Conservation is one of the premier examples of where we're generating revenue, where we're taking the burden off the taxpayers when we look at other ways that we can spend our levy dollars into the areas that are important for us to have. I think this is a really good news story, and even with the rates that they are, we continue to see the bookings and more bookings that are coming through. So I just want to say through you, Chair, to Adam and the staff here at the Balls Falls Center for Conservation, congratulations, keep up the great work, and hopefully keep the center in the black. That's all we can ask.
Thanks, Tony.
As budget chair.
Spoken like a true budget chair. So thanks for your comments, Member Quirk. Member Kasperseth.
Thank you. Just a quick question. In the event of a power outage, do we have a backup generator here or down by the barn?
Yeah, I think Nate could discuss that even further, but I believe we do.
Oh.
No, we don't.
We don't.
Could I simply ask staff to possibly investigate the cost of a backup generation system at here and also down by the barn? Because in the event that we've got a power outage and we have a fair amount of revenue coming in, it might be something we might want to consider.
I think it's a great suggestion, Member Kasperseth, and we'll take that forward as staff direction.
Thank you. I'll make note of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Adam or any other questions with respect to the report? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thanks. And again, Adam, accept the thanks of the board for the great work you're doing and your team. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is 6.2.3, Appointment of Compliance and Enforcement Officer, report number 6418. I will need a mover and a seconder for the following resolution, that report number 6418 respecting the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority Compliance and Enforcement Officer appointment be received, and that Madison Hill, NPCA Compliance and Enforcement Officer, be appointed for the term of employment with the NPCA as an officer effective September 24th, 2018. Can I get a mover for that, please? Moved by Member Kasperseth, seconded by Member Quirk. That report is on the floor for question or comments. Member Beattie.
First of all, thank you. And I'm going to make the assumption that this appointment now fills in one of the openings. So if this passes, we can fill in the name. And again, Lisa, I'll be asking for it in 2019.
And just for the benefit of those watching through the live stream, Member Beattie is referring to the NPCA organizational chart. So thank you, Lisa, for bringing that forward to the benefit of the board members. I know Member Beattie has asked for it probably at just about every board meeting that we've had. So glad that staff have accommodated. It does. It does. Any other questions with respect to the report? On the floor. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. And welcome, Madison Hill. Business in camera. There are no closed session items at this time. I will ask the board, I will poll the board, are there any notices of motion coming forward? Member Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. At the next board meeting, I am going to propose a motion that would ask this board to release the in-camera reports that formulated the basis for the 2010 restructuring and reorganization and led to the strategic plan work that was done. There's been some discussion in the public that they did not feel that they were ever aware of it because a lot of the work that was done involved personnel shifts and a few other things. So the notice of motion will be to release those parts of the report that are in camera redacted to eliminate identifiable individuals so that people can get an understanding of the work that was done through the independent review of the organization, and that they can get a better understanding of what we were up against, what this board was up against before they undertook the process. So I'll be bringing a notice of motion and working with the clerk to make sure that the document is appropriately formatted.
Okay. Thank you for that. So that notice of motion has been made, and it will be coming back to this board at another time under motions. Any other notices of motion at this time? Seeing none, brings us to new business. Any items of new business? Member Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Jeffs had asked that I bring this forward as the request for an identification of the process for identifying the new red line, the new 100-year floodplain mapping for the Welland River floodplain. That the process include a presentation to the association, a public meeting presentation of the new line, followed by recommendations to this board for adopting the red line. I think our concern was that the public and probably all the landowners within the floodplain will want to see the red line and make their comments before the board considers adopting the line. So I just want to be reassured that there will at least be one public meeting presenting the new red line.
So that's under new business. I do accept that as new business. That is direction to staff, certainly. And hopefully staff have heard the concerns of Member Jeffs, as reiterated by Member Timms, and you can come back to this board with a plan to fulfill those requests. Member Timms, you still have the floor? Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that covers the intent, and I gather from the information we've heard, this will happen in January, February of 2019.
Okay.
Thank you.
Member Shurton.
So we hire a consultant to tell us where this line's going to be, and then we're going to go to the public to make suggestions to change the line. I don't see why we need to go to the public until come here, then take it to the public to show it, would be my suggestion. We're opening it up for all different ideas from the public. I don't understand why we do that.
Okay, so to clarify, again, once the lines have been drawn, it's more of an awareness process to make people aware of where those lines are. It's not necessarily an opportunity for the public to comment on changing those lines. Again, this is evidence-based, and when those lines come forward, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we convey that new data to the public. So I just want to clarify, to your point, I agree 100% with you, Member Shurton. Yep. Okay, so I think staff has been very clear. This is a public engagement process, making the public aware, and certainly those affected landowners where those new lines are. That is incumbent, that is imperative, that underpins everything that we've been doing for the last 2 years to make sure that the public is engaged and they are apprised of those new lines moving forward. So Director of Watershed has taken that direction. Member Shurton?
Yes, I have 3 things under new business.
Okay.
Number 1, on Saturday, the previous Saturday, I attended a shoreline erosion open house that was all Haldimand County, was hosted by Haldimand County and Selkirk, which is basically out towards the Long Point Conservation Area. Anyways, there's 3 conservation authorities that were involved. Darren McKenzie from NPCA was there. I didn't really notice somebody from Long Point, but I believe they were there. And I know the GRCA had a representative there. So there was about 60 people there. It was the first open house. They're going to have another open house, and the intention is to try to get more mapping of the shoreline erosion of all Lake Erie, with Haldimand County being impacted with and using 3 conservation areas. So it was a good day there. Number 2, I noticed our next meeting is October the 17th, which is a week before the municipal election. I would suggest if we can get, I'd like to move it to a week later. I know myself, I probably won't be here. I see today there isn't many here. I'm assuming they might be campaigning. I know it doesn't affect everybody, but to me, if we made it a week later, it's after the election, there's probably a better chance of having a better number here. And lastly, my understanding is we have funding available for restoration programs, and I know we heard Chuck Jansen here from the kind of Friends of Low Banks about the erosion issues down there in where they need break walls established, and I would like to be able to go to them and say there's a possibility once they establish this association or Friends of Low Banks erosion area, that maybe we could, the board could pass 75 to 100,000 as a startup for this fund for them to partner with them fixing their own break walls. So I don't know if there's any appetite for questioning about that, or I did consult the CEO before I brought that up today.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's, I know there isn't a lot of members here today, but it's something that I'd like to be able to go back to the public and say, there is the ability for this. I understand there's still dollars in the budget for this, and I just want to be able to say something that's clear and accurate and not to be misleading either when I'm out knocking on doors.
So I'm going to try to address each one of those points. So your first point, I'm going to assume it was a good meeting then. Was there any provincial or federal representation at that meeting that you recall, Member Shurton?
No, it was mainly local. Halton County had EMS there in case there was concerns with incidents happening with on the water area too. Okay. So it was mainly just an open house that was Halton County, which had all three conservation authorities there represented.
Okay, thank you for that. With respect to issue number 2, like all full authority board meetings, what we do is we check with staff to see if there's pressing issues, if there's enough agenda items to fill up an agenda. And again, I'll be consulting with our CEO and senior management team. And again, if there's business to be conducted, we will be conducting business. If business is not time sensitive or there's not enough agenda items to populate the agenda, then it'll be up to the discretion of the chair to either cancel that meeting or move it, but I'll keep this board informed well in advance of whether or not the October meeting will go forward. So you can be sure of that. With respect to the third item, anytime that there's an initiative to allocate funding, it's a full board decision. By all means, I would encourage you to bring forward either via notice of motion or a motion to bring that forward, and at that time it'll be up to the discretion of the board whether or not to submit it to budget committee or to explore or expand on the opportunities to subsidize or help fund some of those initiatives. So again, that's via notice of motion or motion, but I'm not going to accept that as staff direction at this point. As the board member, by all means, you're well within your rights to bring forward that recommendation.
On that last point, the only other thing I'd like to know, and I don't know where we're at, my understanding is because the water levels have changed, and Mark and Darren, a few staff members was out there for a public consultation, which was awesome. Do we need to redraw the erosion or the floodplain, or I mean the water level line before they can move forward? Like, where are they at as far as being able to apply for permits?
I'll direct that to staff.
I'll take a first run at it, and then there's additional staff here. We have been out there. We have toured the many properties impacted, and the impact along the Lake Erie shoreline is massive. And there's no question that many of the mitigation factors and solutions put in place 20, 30 years ago are no longer relevant. They've been overwhelmed by higher lake levels, presumably to support the shipping lanes in particular. So lake levels in Lake Erie are considerably higher. The mitigation measures put in place 20, 30 years ago have been completely overwhelmed by the water there. And the damage along the shoreline is extensive and will continue to get worse. That obviously impacts our future regulation of the shoreline. We have indicated that we want to be at the table to provide assistance, though we don't provide direct assistance. Haldeman actually is in receipt of provincial dollars that they are able to put towards this project, and so they are the ones now responsible for dispersing those dollars. The funds that we potentially have available, we do have the water quality improvement funds that goes through a committee of the board to approve finances, the financial commitments on those projects. That would require that they form a friends of or group along those lines to align with the current program. However, the application deadline is coming upon us really quickly, I think in the next week or so. And as such, we would have to see whether there's still dollars available in that pot once that cycle has been completed. So I don't fully know where we are there. We are at the table. We'll continue to be at the table. And while it's not our direct funding responsibility, if we have a program that aligns with it, we may be able to at least offer a one-time assistance.
Okay. So perhaps you can bring back to your partners and your stakeholders, Member Shurton, and maybe convey those thoughts to them. But again, totally independent of the CAO's comments, as the representative from that area, if you would like to bring forward a notice of motion or motion on any of those issues, certainly the board would entertain them.
Okay, that's great. And because I'm hearing it may be time sensitive, I might do a follow-up with Chuck and see where they're at with that, and maybe have him have some correspondence with Mark, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Member Maloney.
With the knowledge that we have of the current state of the erosion, are we not in a position to start lobbying the provincial and federal governments that they should come up with some policies or programs that would allow shoreline owners to apply for, even at just a loan basis, not necessarily out grant, but even the money that Mr. Shurton has suggested sounds like an awful lot of money, $100,000. But when you do these shoreline projects, that could easily only help a few properties. And as I understand it, the whole shoreline needs it.
So
there's a big lobbying effort.
Yeah, I agree.
All those interested.
Yeah. So to your point, Member Maloney, and they're great points. I'm not necessarily sure that the direction from this board is for the NPCA to be the lead agency on advocating and lobbying for provincial and federal funding with respect to erosion and shoreline erosion problems. I'm a big fan of the deference model, and I'm going to suggest that there's a whole lot more power in your local voice as the Mayor of Port Colborne and your council, and certainly up and down the shoreline. If those individual municipal councils come forward with a resolution requesting the province or the federal government to help in funding, I would suggest that goes a whole lot further in those lobbying efforts. And I look forward to having those resolutions passed on to this board, and certainly we would certainly get behind those resolutions when they come from those host municipalities that are suffering these problems right now. So that would be my advice moving forward. But again, I don't necessarily think that we've been given direction to be the lead lobbying voice on those issues. So I hope that answers your question.
I don't mean to suggest that we be the lead, but I think it's time that people start to stand up and be counted. Yeah. That we should be one of the many voices calling for this program. And
I know we have been, and I've just been informed by the CEO that we've actually sent letters with respect to those issues to our provincial and federal partners as well. Yeah. So again, the NPCA is doing their part to lobby efforts, but again, it's a multifaceted problem that takes the cooperation of all our partners. Having those voices from our lower tier municipalities come forward, that is going to play a huge role as well. But to your point, Member Maloney, and certainly the CAO has informed me that we have sent letters and we are actively lobbying and advocating the province to help in this situation. Member Kaspersets.
Can we reiterate to those people along the shorelines that we're going to have some type of a streamlining process to get their permits out there much more quicker, and then also some type of reduced fee, one fee for a bunch of connecting homeowners, just to give them some type of financial relief? Because I know the average the average engineering fee per household could be as high as $8,000. So.
And I do believe that that was the recommendation that came to this board, and I think our CAO committed that absolutely, whatever we can do to streamline that process, we're going to do on our part. So
Mr. Shurton can relay that to the people in Lowbanks, that there is a process in place to help them already.
Well, I'll refer to the comments of the CAO. Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Chair. To be clear, we will do all of this by a single permit. So there's not going to be any complication. All of this work will be approved through a single permit. What we are waiting on is the study, which the people in that area tell me that that's nearing completion. To Member Maloney's point, the cost estimates that have come in are massive.
Okay, any other new business items? Mickey?
I was just wondering if on the biannual tour, if you could include Morningstar Mill and Lake Gibson DQ House, the new memorial to our First Nations contribution to the War of 1812, the new memorial there.
So great comments, Mickey, and we're going to pass those comments on to the committee, the biannual tour committee, and if we can include those items on the tour, then we'll certainly try. But again, it's a jam-packed program, but if there's opportunities to highlight those properties, absolutely we're going to do that.
Because these are very significant, they're very significant, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Especially to our First Nation.
Okay, thanks for that, Mickey. The last item of new business I'd like to bring forward is to wish Mickey a very happy birthday. On September 8th, he turned 93. So at this time, Mickey, on behalf of the board, bring out the cake. And while we celebrate Mickey's birthday, I'm going to ask a mover and a seconder for adjournment. Moved by Member Kasperset, second by Member Shurton. All those in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday. Oh boy, this is a surprise. This is not 200 years.